So this video is for those people who are maybe new to modelers and wanting to know some sort of maybe first tips of where to start. Hopefully this will be a useful video. If it is, could you like and subscribe? There's loads of this other sort of stuff on my channel, and I'm hoping it's useful to people. The reason I don't just reply to the emails and put it up for other people is because I think other people have the same sort of questions. If you don't know who I am, my name's John, and probably a few people that are on this channel know my playing through Kempers, 9.6 Helixes, HX Stomp. If we go back a bit further, my first ever modeler was a Pod XT Live, which I got when I was still a teenager. I'm fairly used to the idea of creating a workflow and tones with a modeler. You may have seen some of my videos, and the bundles are available for you to check out those tones if you want. I charge $2.99 for you to have all of them, so it's not a massive money making scheme, but it takes some time for me to put these things together, so that's just what that idea is. So let's get into it. So the first thing I'll say is that the stock presets that come with a device like an HX Stomp are often not going to get you closest to the tone that you are chasing. So what this generally means in practice is that the presets that come preloaded onto a device like the HX Stomp or the Helix, or the pods and stuff, are generally a bit of a kitchen sink approach, in that they're throwing lots of effects and lots of simultaneous things together, which may or may not end up in a result that is something that you would actually use or like. That's kind of my first point. So there's a limited kind of conclusion or set of conclusions that you can take about how a device is going to sound. For instance, the Line 6 Pocket Pod, some of the presets on there would lead you to believe that it's actually not a very useful device. When you actually get in there and edit those tones and try out and build tones for yourself, I think you might be quite surprised at what even that is capable of. The second point that I would think is kind of important to get across is that a modeler doesn't really sound like an amp in the room. This is a question that I get a lot, and on, for instance, my Strymon Iridium videos, where people were saying, does it sound like an amp in the room? What modelers sound like is the end result of a mic'd amp in another room, if that makes sense. So if you imagine you're in the control room of a studio and you have an amp in the sound room or the live room, you're sat behind the desk hearing back what is being recorded in that room. That's effectively the scenario that you've got when you're using a modeler. It's a bit of a paradigm shift, and not necessarily one that everyone can overcome. If you're literally thinking, well, I want the sound of an amp in a room, nothing really replaces an amp in the room. You can do other things, like try to have full range flat response speakers, or you can use things like the power cab, and these things will probably get you closer, but an amp in the room is not really what these things are about. And on that point 3 is a modeler will pretty much sound as good as the weakest link, and oftentimes that'll be the speaker or speakers that you're hearing it through. What I personally use are JBL LSR 305s, and I recommend something like that, or Yamaha HS5s, or I think I had before these some cheaper Behringer MS20s. What these are is home mixing or studio monitors. You don't have to pay crazy money for them, but they're made to be used in a smaller environment. Some people use full range flat response speakers, and these are generally, I think, coming from the PA world, which are designed to throw sound a long way. So the main driver and speaker configuration, or tweeter and speaker configuration, are not necessarily designed to sound how you'd expect if you're 1-2 feet away, whereas I think home sort of monitor devices are called near field monitors. I think that's what that's referring to, as in it's designed to sound like a together sound if you're within a closer range. If you're, you know, this far away from a PA speaker, you're going to get quite a big separation between the highs and the lows, and probably not a huge amount of mids. You're going to get like a different sound, is basically what I'm trying to say. So in a small home studio or space like the one that I record in, I don't think you'd necessarily try to crank a valve amp, and for that same reason I don't think I'd get good results out of a full range flat response speaker if I'm trying to keep volumes low and if I'm close to the speaker. So that's sort of my 3 points about what a modeler is and isn't, and some general kind of things that might help you get into modelling, or help you think about what modelling is. Now here's 5 general points about what I would suggest. So number 1 is start off simple and ditch the kitchen sink approach. If you were selecting a normal kind of rig, you know, like drive pedals, cabinet head, guitar, you wouldn't start off with everything on, and you wouldn't switch every component at once. So what I mean by that is, if you've got a Mesa Boogie amp, you lucky boy, and then you're like, right, I'm going to put together this tone for whatever tune. You're not going to go, right, I'm going to get my flanger, I'm going to get my chorus, I'm going to get 3 delay pedals, I'm going to put them all on at once, and then I'll go, oh, that's not quite the right sound, so I'm going to switch amp and cabinet. That's not really how we tweak in a normal scenario. So this is what I'm saying. When you get to your modeler, is there an amp that you love in real life, or one that you wish you tried but you've never owned? Or maybe that's a good place to start. So for instance, on the HX Stomp, they've got a nice Mesa Lone Star model, they've got a nice Mesa Mark IV model, there's nice Marshall JTM models, there's all loads of good stuff, there's Fullerton, Fender amps. So maybe start with one amp, one cab, and that's where you're going to focus your attention for a while. This is what I did when I first got the HX Stomp. I took it on holiday to a little cottage, and it was raining, and Fenton was a tiny puppy, and I sat, and I think you can see the video, it's that fireplace video. It's just the PRS Archon, I think, and then I tried 3 drive pedals with it. Nothing else really changed. Keep things simple. You're going to learn more from that. There's no need to switch out everything all at once. And if you're auditioning drive pedals in real life, or any kind of pedal, generally you'd probably only switch that drive pedal to get a real idea of how the character of each drive pedal works. Perhaps as a guitarist with tone that you really admire, and you think, I want to get something like that going on for whatever reason. So for instance, someone asked me to do the Mateus Asato sound like videos. When I created those patches, I think I started off just going from my own sort of vibe of what he was using. So I think I went for a Marshall JTM tone. Then I looked into it a little bit more, came back to it, and saw that he's using a Bogner Shiva, and that was what inspired me to look at the, is it called the German Mahadeva model? Because previously I've never really used a Bogner model, I've never touched a Bogner amp in real life. There's no reason really that I would have tried one for any significant amount of time, other than I've seen that Mateus Asato uses one, and that's prompted me to look at that model and get to know it a bit better. That's kind of how I'd suggest the way in to your modeler might be. Start off simple with one amp or one concept that you're trying to get into, and then start tweaking. Point 2 is to build piece by piece. If you start with the amp, add a cabinet or an IR, and IR is a whole different rabbit hole. to go down. Me personally, I found one IR that I really like, and I use that across a lot of stuff. I normally pair it with another cabinet. Remember that with the HX Stomp, the Helix, any modelling device, the possibilities are going to be almost infinite. I think that's kind of where the win is with the Strymon Iridium, in that things are kept deliberately simple, and that's how I think more people that were coming from the analog or amp world were able to jump in and get good results. So your possibilities are infinite. Switching one component or parameter in the device at a time will help you to figure out the device and different tweaks and what makes a difference. For instance, there's EQ blocks, there's a global EQ, you've got EQs on the amp models. If you're going to be making changes, you're probably not going to want to make changes across all three at once, so just keep it simple. So start off with an amp and just try tweaking the mids, the bass, the treble, the normal sort of amp stuff, the presence, before you start messing around with EQ blocks. It's my suggestion anyway. Personally, I've never used an EQ block in the HX Stomp. I do use the high cut and the low cut, but that's just me. You might find that you get good results from using the EQs. For me, I don't find it's particularly necessary. Point 3 is that once you have a core tone that works for you, keep that as a template. So save that in a few different places, and then when you come to tweak, you can go from there and make changes to that core template or tone that you have that you were happy with at one stage. You can add delays and modulations, for instance, to a core tone that you know you liked. And this, for instance, is how I worked with the Pod XT Live and the Pod HD 500 when I had those. I spent a lot of time tweaking one particular sound, and that was the core template that I then made more sounds from. Like a lead tone would be similar to my rhythm tone, but with the mids boosted and a delay, and maybe like an EQ on to take off some of the top end to smooth it out a bit. But in terms of difference between tones, the rhythm and lead tones, and this still is the case to this day, are quite similar, and are coming from the same sort of place. So for a real rig, generally I'd suggest that you'd have one element that is the same in that rig. So you're using one amp, for instance. So although there is the possibility with the HX Stomp to switch out amps and stuff, that's not particularly how I would use the amp in a live scenario. There's more on that in a sec. But so point 4 is to take breaks and stop to listen to what you're tweaking. It's quite easy when you're doing this stuff to go down a rabbit hole that can lead you to make tonal decisions that, when you reflect on them, are not exactly what you would have done with a fresh ear. Similar to mixing actual music or anything like that. So yeah, take breaks and listen to what you've done. Maybe save different versions. That's what I did the other day with the Robin Ford tones, because I had a sound that I thought I liked. I saved that one, I went back and made a few listens to Revelation, and then came back and thought, well, that's a bit brighter, so I created another preset and tried to create a brighter tone. So that's what I'd suggest, makes sense to do. And remember that even with real amps, it often does take time to settle in with an amp and get tones that you're happy with. So yeah, I took photos of tones that I was really happy with the Mesa Boogie Nomad, and that meant that I could come back at any stage and go, alright, what was my lead tone? Because in transit and stuff, knobs can move. You can forget, obviously, if you've got 7 knobs to remember the position of, you're not generally, I wouldn't imagine that you're going to be able to do that. Let me take a sip of my drink. So similarly, with the HX Stomp, you've got even more parameters on the real amp, so it makes sense to try and save presets where you've made changes and make incremental changes. So for instance, live I might make a change to a patch. I try, if I can remember to save that and then not overwrite what was going on before. And then point 5 is on this idea of simplicity again. I can get through most gigs that I do, so weddings and all that sort of stuff, with 3 tones, clean, rhythm and lead, and that's exactly what I used to do with a real amp. Snapshots are the way that I do this on the HX Stomp, and I suggest that they're kind of a super powerful tool. So I have clean here, lead is in the middle, and then rhythm is on the end. So snapshot 1 is rhythm, snapshot 2 is lead, and snapshot 3 is clean. That generally will do it for me. I think I then also have an expression pedal or a switch to switch in delay for one tune, which needs that extreme delay, which is Shut Up and Dance. If you ever played that, it's got that like dotted delay thing going on. So that's just my approach to try and getting a cohesive sound throughout the gig. I think there are other people that do the approach of trying to tone match per song, which I guess is a valid way to do it, but from my point of view, if you were in a normal band with a normal amp, that's not generally what you'd be doing. You'd have your core tone and that would remain consistent through the gig. And I'm imagining from a mixing point of view, if you've got a sound man, that's going to be what they prefer to work with, given that they have to think about a bunch of other musicians as well at the same time. They don't want to necessarily then think, oh, that guitar tone's completely different from the previous one. So I like to keep it simple. Got a clean tone, a lead tone which has a significant boost, because I don't trust the sound man necessarily to turn you up during a solo, and I don't think that should necessarily have to be the case anyway. And then A is my rhythm. So those are my first thoughts on how I would try to communicate to you, the viewer, what my approach to modelers is, how it differs to an amp, and how I would start off. There's a video of me building a deluxe reverb patch, which I'll probably link or something. But that's just my thoughts. Keep it simple to start with. There's no reason that you can't branch out and then do more complicated stuff, but there are good results to be had from modelers, and I think the secret is to keep things simple to start with. And even now my patches generally are not complicated. They're just generally an amp cabinet using a delay and a reverb. I guess the secret is into how you use the snapshots to create different textures within a tone, and also how you tweak those parameters to get a tone that works for you. If you've got ideas for future videos where you'd like me to delve into some stuff, please leave comments below. Hopefully this is useful. That's the idea of the videos, that I'm trying to get across to you my approach to some of this stuff. Hopefully if you've seen my stuff you think, oh, that tone's not completely awful or whatever. If this is helpful, if you could like and subscribe, that would be super beneficial for me. And let me know what future stuff you want me to do with this. I've got a couple more questions to answer from emails, but if this is useful for you, interact with it, and I'll be able to do more of them. I'm trying to figure out a way that I can film me actually tweaking a patch without it being impossible to see. I don't really want to go into the screen capture of an not online is not the word, is it, but of the editing in the editor, because that's not how I create patches. I never have done. I edit on the actual device, so that's what I want to try and capture because I'm not sure that I'd do the same sorts of make the same sorts of decisions if I'm clicking with the mouse. That's just my take on it. But yeah, hopefully this is somewhat helpful. Thank you for watching.